Step into the squared circle, where the bell echoes through decades, where main events become legends and tag teams tore the house down. From the undercard to the top of the card, this is Portland Wrestling at its finest. One ring, one city, 1,000 stories. This is Ringside in Rose City. And here's your hosts, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rogers.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. You always know how to kick the show off just right in style. I'm Frank Culbertson, alongside the man who knows more about Portland wrestling than anyone. Historian, referee par excellence, Battle Royal survivor, James Melby Award winner. Did I leave anything out? Let's see. Author. And this is
Mike Rogers.
This is Ringside in Rose City. One ring, one city, and 1,000 stories. If you're here for Portland wrestling history, the larger-than-life personalities, the crowds that shook the building, the chaos once the bell rang, and those unforgettable nights at the Portland Sports Arena, if that's what you're here for, you're sitting exactly where you need to be, right here, sitting ringside. Now, as our listeners know, Mike and I don't exactly walk around in here with a game plan. There's no script, there's no roadmap, and we're definitely not the ones in control. It's not even close for, as you listeners know, Lisa. She runs the ringside wheel. The ringside wheel decides where we go, and Mike and I, we just hold on and see where it lands and hope to survive the night. So, Lisa, if you would, give that ringside wheel a spin. All right, let's see where that wheel has taken us tonight. Lisa, the envelope, please.
Here you go.
Thank you. Mike, the envelope says we're heading into March of 1969. Now, the last time we were here, we talked about February. And February didn't just get things back on track from the January snowstorms. It's, well, using a phrase that you use all the time, it got turned up. The crowds came rolling back. The Portland Sports Arena was packed. Rivalries exploded, and chaos pretty much ruled the month. You had Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay finally winning the tag titles. You had Lonnie Maine and Tony Bourne forming that unholy alliance and causing havoc everywhere they went, even at father-daughter-son events, which still boggles my mind to this day. You had the Von Steigers manipulating the tag team scene in a way only they could, and then you bring in a name like Lou Thez, drawing the biggest crowd the sports arena had seen so far, and suddenly it feels like Portland wrestling is stepping onto a larger stage. So now the question becomes what happens next, because February wasn't the ending payoff. It should be like the setup. New feuds, shifting roles, hopefully bigger crowds, bigger names coming in. And Mike, March of 1969 feels like the month where it either all comes together or completely spins out of control. So Mike, take us back to the Portland Sports Arena. What was happening March of 1969?
Well, you've got Lonnie and Tony. They've reformed their tag team, and they're back in the mix. They're feuding with the Von Steiger brothers, both heels, and Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas. So you've got kind of a three-way battle for the tag titles. Lindsay and Shag have held them. The Von Steigers have held them. And Lonnie and Tony have not won the belts yet since they've reformed. You have Luther Lindsay holding the singles title that he won from Beauregard, who defended that title for Lonnie Maine. Lonnie Maine was absent from the area due to an injury, and then Beauregard immediately left the area, fearing wrath of Lonnie Maine whenever he returned. And so Beauregard's not in the area right now. So you have those six wrestlers, those three tag teams. That's the nucleus of the territory.
And so we start right at March 1st in Portland. Billy White Wolf, who has just really come back into the area, and the paper does a great job of recapping of why he had left, because his nose had been damaged. It had been broken, Mike. It had been shattered by the Von Steigers, as the paper tells us. So he's coming back, and he's going to want revenge on the Von Steigers. But as we know, he wanted Kurt Von Steiger, who actually broke his nose the first match. He wanted Kurt Von Steiger, but Kurt was on indefinite suspension, still in Portland at that time. As we know, we've talked about in February, Kurt actually wrestled a match at the end of the month in a different city. So the suspension only worked in Portland, one of those little technicalities. So Billy White Wolf beat Karl Von Steiger 2 out of 3 falls. Luther Lindsay drew Dutch Savage, which would have been a great match because Dutch is really just getting known to the fans in Portland. Really won't be here for a little while yet, but that would have been a good match.
That would have been a great match. And the Kurt Von Steiger suspension in Portland. I really don't understand that. I don't understand what's going on because he's still wrestling in other towns in the territory. So it's not like he's suspended so we can leave and go to Japan or anything. That's a head scratcher. I don't know about that one.
Well, and it's going to become part of the booking strategy towards the end of the month that we'll be getting to here in a little while if his suspension even gets listed. But you got Lonnie Maine beating, as the paper called him, the strong boy, Dean Ho. Stan Stasiak and Luigi Massera beat John Tolos and Bulldog Brown by a DQ. And the midgets are in town. Jamaica Kid and Joey Russell beat Cowboy Cassidy and Billy the Kid. Midget action always brings the fan in, but John Tolos and Bulldog Brown, a lot of people wouldn't think of them as a really good tag team, but that would have been a solid tag team against Massera and Stasiak.
Yeah, this is a really good card. Dean Higuchi, Dean Ho, Tolos, Brown, and Savage have all come down from Vancouver to really spice up and strengthen this card. And when you look at the whole card in total, there's great talent on this show.
Absolutely. And so the next night, in one of the towns that would become a real staple for Portland wrestling for a while, we think of Salem and Eugene, but Longview really became a solid town for Portland. And so in Longview, Mike, Longview is not Portland, is it? Is it the same city or not?
No, it is not.
So guess whose suspension is not happening in Longview? And that would be Kurt Von Steiger. So I love the advertisements for this because in big letters across the ads, that they ran ads consistently for a week in Longview, all of them said in capital letters, live, violent, and professional. I'm glad they added professional in there because I would not want to go see just live, violent, unprofessional action, would you?
No, absolutely not.
No, that's what our podcast after party is usually like. And the paper says it was standing room only. Karl Von Steiger, we'll talk about things that they did that's unusual. Here's one of them. Karl Von Steiger pinned Maine in the opener. He pinned him. And then the Von Steigers, the paper says, used every trick in the book to win 2 straight falls fairly quickly over Bourne and Maine. And Don Owen announced that they would have a rematch on the 24th and a no falls fight to the finish, and that Luther Lindsay would be the ringside referee to keep the Von Steigers legal. That's interesting because it isn't Luther Lindsay there to watch all 4 of these guys, Maine and Bourne, who are heels, and the Von Steigers, who are heels. Luther Lindsay is going to be put in the Von Steigers' corner to keep them from cheating. But both teams are heels, Mike.
Yeah, there's a lot of things on this that, looking back 50 years later, is like, what was going on here? Like, Karl Von Steiger, Kurt Von Steiger was the more pushed of the Von Steiger brothers. And I say that because Kurt held the Northwest title on a couple different occasions, and Karl did not. So Kurt was the one they would push a little bit stronger. And for Karl to beat Lonnie in the opener when Lonnie has just come back, it hasn't been that long, unless it was nefarious manner that Kurt interfered to help spice up the main event, that doesn't make sense in upon itself.
Nefarious. There you have it. The word of the day. He's got the calendar. Nefarious is the word of the day. And I should mention that he lost in the opener, and then Kurt and Karl, as the tag team, beat Tony and Lonnie in the main event, as it says, fairly quickly. So the paper is even pointing out that something was really unusual. And midgets go 2 out of 3 falls. And Luther Lindsay drew with Sandy Barr, which is also a unusual match for me in that it wasn't the opener. I could see Luther and Sandy go into a draw in the opener, but not as the second card on the match.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the Von Steigers get the win fairly quickly, but then Lonnie and Tony earn a rematch. They're not blowing off the feud right here. It's just a stepping stone.
And very sadly on this day, Mickey Mantle announced his retirement due to, well, they weren't allowing beer at the batter's. No, due to his legs not being what they were. So on this day, March 3rd, 1969, Mickey Mantle hung him up. So then we go to Salem, and on this card, it lists Billy White Wolf as, quote unquote, the Injun from Oklahoma. That's a good name for him. Billy White Wolf beats Lonnie Maine by DQ. We'll talk about that. Luther Lindsay drew Tony Bourne, 1 fall each. Buddy Marino beat Haru Sasaki, and Stan Crusher Stasiak drew Eric Froelich. I want to mention Crusher Stasiak because in this time period, if I search for results under Stan Stasiak, I will miss a lot of results because the paper would list him as Crusher, not even Crusher Stasiak, just as Crusher.
Right.
So that was a great name for him. Of course, whatever name, greatest wrestler in the history of the world. So White Wolf won the first fall with chops and a pin. Maine took the second fall with a leap from the top rope, and the third fall saw Tony Bourne interfere, and Shag Thomas DQ'd Lonnie Maine. So we've got Shag Thomas, who was in the tag team mix, now back to refereeing, although that's going to change by the end of the month once again.
Yeah, and Buddy Marino is in his early stages of debuting. Here he gets a win over Haru Suzuki. Buddy Marino had been here earlier in his career, and he's coming back. So obviously the fans are going to remember him from that run earlier in the 60s.
And it's a time where Buddy's going to really start to get a push because the very next night in Eugene on the 7th, Buddy Marino beat Lonnie Maine. Billy White Wolf beat Eric Froelich. Luther Lindsay beat Haru Suzuki. And the Midgets, Jamaica Kid and Joey Russell, beat Cowboy Bradley and Billy the Kid. The paper lists the Midgets as 3.5 feet tall and 95 pounds. The paper didn't always list what size they were, but there you have it, 3.5 feet tall. In the third fall of this, Maine was going up top for his finisher, the knee drop, and that's going to become important down the road as that is Lonnie's finisher. When Billy White Wolf pushed him off the turnbuckle and Marino fell across him for the pin.
You know, it's interesting here. You have White Wolf, you have Luther Lindsay. Those would be the baby faces that you would assume would top the card with Maine. But you have Buddy Marino in this spot, but Billy White Wolf still gets the spotlight on him by figuring in the finish of the match. So even though Marino gets the win, you can certainly see the booking is leaning to Maine versus White Wolf.
And one of the things that you have taught me to do over the years is always look at who's not on the card. And the Von Steigers are not in Eugene. So what's that tell you about maybe the long term for the Von Steigers? Although we're going to see them the rest of the month, long term, maybe they'll are working someone like a Marino into one of those spots.
It's interesting to note during the time that they would bring the midgets in, sometimes they could split cards and go to two different shows. In fact, as I look, I'm not certain my dates are right, but I have two shows scheduled on the 8th. I have a Portland show and I have a Roseburg show. I would believe that they did have two shows because none of the wrestlers on either card are duplicated. So that when the midgets come in, that enables them to run two shows a night.
That actually did make sense because if you had enough wrestlers in the area working two shows, because a small spot show in a small community, that's what, 6, maybe 7 wrestlers.
Well, yeah, and you could get away with 4 midgets and 2 large wrestlers. You could have the midgets wrestle 2 single matches, and then hopefully you have a nice main event with the regular size wrestlers. So they're going to get the midgets and a quality main event as well.
And as our fantasy booking would do, we could, for the main event, throw them all in a battle royal, midgets and the regular size guys. See, there you go. Now we're jumping back into Portland on the 8th, and thankfully, Kurt Von Steiger's suspension, his indefinite suspension, is lifted, and he's back in there. And you know who wants him, don't you? It's Billy White Wolf, and he beat Kurt Von Steiger by DQ. Eric Froelich beat Tony Orford. Stan Stasiak drew Karl Von Steiger. Luther Lindsay beat John Tolos by DQ, a match I would have really enjoyed. And Lonnie Maine drew Buddy Marino. Now, actually, Kurt Von Steiger was declared the winner of the match, but it was reversed, and Von Steiger was then DQ'd. And you know who the referee was for that match? Yeah, that's right. It was Shag Thomas.
Shag Thomas, yep.
So then we go to the 11th, and this is where the papers...
I'll stop you for just a moment. Somehow I've got a result for Roseburg, and I had just mentioned that running 2 shows a night. So here's who was on Roseburg. Joey Russell and Jamaica Kid beating Cowboy Bradley and Billy the Kid. Luigi Massera beat Haru Suzuki, and Bobby Nichols beats Tony Bourne on disqualification. So here's an example. You've got the midgets, and then you've got 4 regular-sized wrestlers as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned Bobby Nichols because we're just about to talk about Bobby Nichols. So they go to Corvallis on the 11th, and Corvallis was another town that always drew really well. And in the main event, Luther Lindsay beat Lonnie Maine by DQ, and there were two referees, Bobby Nichols and Billy White Wolf. And Luther won due to the chair shot mix-up that happened the last time where Luther had been disqualified for using the chair. Fans pointed out, as they rightfully should have, that no, Lonnie had used the chair, and so he was disqualified, and Lonnie was really, really mad. Also on the card, Karl Von Steiger beat Bobby Nichols in the opener in 20 minutes. I like to call that a long 20 minutes. Billy White Wolf beat Karl Von Steiger 2 out of 3 falls and gave Von Steiger a quote-unquote good thrashing, as the paper notes. And White Wolf comes in, and he had just been wrestling a few matches in Hawaii. And Mike, where can people find out about Hawaii wrestling? And we'll probably be talking about Hawaii a little bit.
Well, I imagine there's a book out called, Oh Yeah, The History of Hawaiian Wrestling. And you can find that on Amazon.
Absolutely. You would find that Billy White Wolf had been there and is coming back. Now, Karl Von Steiger is advertised as he's going to do battle with the quote-unquote Spanish-talking Caballero, Buddy Marino. And for a few weeks, we see the paper pushing that Buddy Marino is really reaching out to the Hispanic community and thanking them for coming in and giving them some support. I don't know that it really got over. Buddy had a decent run here, but I don't think necessarily the run that Don Owen was looking for. You mentioned that Don would sometimes put wrestlers in and see how fans reacted to him. So Buddy got some reaction, but maybe not exactly what Don Owen was hoping for.
Right. And here we are, the 11th. We're talking about the 11th in Corvallis. There also was a show in Seattle that night, and Buddy Marino ended up on that card rather than the Corvallis card that he was billed for. Stasiak was also on there, and Luigi Massera, and the rest of the card was filled out with Vancouver guys. So that was a chance, a little bit of a split card on that night as well. And the midgets weren't on either card.
And it makes sense for Luigi Massera, as you mentioned, to be on the second card, because normally if you're looking for 2 referees, he would be the second referee. Portland used him as a referee a lot during 1969, so he's working in Seattle. Now, in this match, Lonnie Maine appeared to have beat Lindsay by pinfall in the third fall, but he had his feet on the ropes for leverage, and the second ref caught him and DQ'd Maine. Lindsay won the first fall. Maine took a second. And the paper notes that this match was very, very bloody. Sounds like a good time.
That's what we need more today. Wrestlers disqualified for putting their foot on the ropes. That's what's missing in wrestling today.
It's one of those things we've talked about, how hard it is for heels to generate real heat today. Simple things like your feet on the ropes generates heel heat, or the fans, doesn't it?
It's those small things that the fans are watching for so they can participate in the match as well by alerting the ref some nefarious actions are taking place.
And so on the 12th, they go all the way to Eastern Oregon over to Baker City. And here the midgets are back on there as Jamaica Kid and Joey Russell beat Cowboy Bradley and Billy the Kid. Tony Bourne versus Luther Lindsay in the main event. And Lonnie Maine is appearing. It doesn't say Lonnie wrestles. The advertisements just say Lonnie Maine's appearing.
Yeah, they must not have had an opponent figured in yet. Hopefully he wrestled and just get paraded out there and wave at the crowd.
But as you mentioned how few wrestlers you really needed for a spot show, that's a perfect example. You've only got Tony Bourne, Luther Lindsay, Lonnie Maine appearing, so they probably put someone in there in a match with him. And then the midgets, and that was a full card and drew really well in Baker City.
Sure. I can't imagine that Baker City gets too many forms of different types of entertainment. So yeah, going to a town like this they're going to draw as many people as they can.
I was in Baker City one day. It seemed like a month, but it's Baker City. So we come back and across the state. We're in Salem on the 13th, and a lot of great stuff in here. Lonnie Maine beat Billy White Wolf by countout. I want to ask you about countouts in Salem in a minute. Stan Stasiak and Buddy Marino beat the Von Steigers by DQ, and Luther Lindsay drew Eric Froelich. Now, tell me about the building in Salem and why so many matches, as we will see, and we have seen, were ending with ramming of heads into the walls. because that couldn't happen at the Portland Sports Arena. You would have had to take them, 50 yards to the side.
Yeah, the Grand Theater in Salem probably was one of my favorite places to go to wrestling. The setup was very unique. They put the ring, so it was just an old theater, and they put the ring right up next to the stage, and then they had seating on the stage. And that was the very, very best place to sit, in my opinion, because you were sitting level with the ring, not sitting on the floor looking up at the ring. So it was just a real unique perspective. And anytime the wrestlers would go out of the ring on that side, they're now on the stage, and it's very close quarters. And the wall was just begging them to run into them. So there was a lot of running wrestlers into the wall in Salem for sure.
Absolutely. And that absolutely happened in this, as Maine and Wolf were battling outside the ring in the third fall when Maine rammed White Wolf's head into the wall. Maine crawled back into the ring, and White Wolf was counted out. And Tony Bourne had been banned from the building because he had been interfering in the matches in Salem, but he was banned from the building. It'll happen again here very soon with Tony Bourne getting in trouble. But what would you think the capacity of Salem crowd was at the theater? It was much smaller than the sports arena.
I would say there was a balcony, and I'm going to guess 300. And very, very interesting, because I just had a friend this last week attend the Grand Theater and go to a concert. And I said, I'm sure that it's been updated. And her response was, I don't know. I don't know if it has. I go, because I was there in 1974 at a match. Surely it's been updated. And her reply was, I don't know.
That is spectacular. So we go to Eugene the very next night. Billy White Wolf beat Lonnie Maine by DQ from referee Shag Thomas once again. Stan Stasiak beat Tony Bourne. Eric Froelich beat Sandy Barr in the opener. Now, the paper's been pushing that Tony and Stan were former tag team partners who were now feuding. And they actually were for 2 months in April and May of 1968 before the sports arena. They actually won the tag titles from Beauregard and Lonnie Maine. So Stan Stasiak and Tony Bourne as a tag team, the tall and the short, would have been a formidable team, though. Really talented individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stasiak's been here now a couple weeks. He's been put into preliminaries on the back burner. I'm sure that he's going to get some better matches coming up, but you have Billy White Wolf and Luther Lindsay, Buddy Marino have been getting the main event babyface, but I'm sure Stan Stasiak's going to get his matches here soon.
Yeah, and we're going to see that they put Stan in some tag matches with Buddy Marino and make a new team and kind of protect them. They're not top-level tag team, but they're right in that mix that can wrestle against other teams, and that's kind of what you need in the territory days. Right. Now, we're back in Portland on the 15th, and Lonnie Maine beat Luther Lindsay in a non-title match because Lindsay insists Maine is not a worthy challenger. He said there are far too many worthy challengers in the dressing room, and he won't put the title up against Lonnie Maine unless Lonnie beats him, and of course Lonnie does. Billy White Wolf beat Eric Froelich. Tony Bourne drew with Stan Stasiak, so they're doing a continuing thing. Kurt Von Steiger beat Tony Orford, and Buddy Marino beat the flamboyant Floridian Jack Bentz. We've had a few names for Jack Bentz, but I had not seen him called the flamboyant Floridian. How's that fit for you?
Oh, I like it. I like it a lot. Although flamboyant somehow just would be one of the last words that I would use to describe Jack Bentz.
We're going to get you another nickname here in just a little while when we get to Eric Froelich. But I also want to mention that the paper, we've had Lonnie Maine called a couple of different names, different terms that we had never heard of before. The paper this week calls him belligerent. Another great name, the belligerent Lonnie Maine.
I like that. I like that a lot. That lends credence to him. I like that.
Now, it probably didn't work out in the sense of where they were going at the time, but on the 12th, we mentioned they were in Baker City in the east of Oregon. And then on the 16th, they're in Pendleton. So they go from Portland, they're back east. So if I was booking it and wanted to make sense to save money, I'd have gone Baker City and then Pendleton and then back to Portland. But they didn't ask me, so they went to Pendleton on the 16th. Again, midgets on the card, 2 out of 3 falls. Sandy Barr was wrestling Lonnie Maine, 2 out of 3 falls in the semi-main. And Tony Bourne versus Kurt Von Steiger. So that's a pretty healthy card going all the way over to Pendleton.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, again, just like you mentioned, a little bit of foresight could have had those two towns on the same week. And it's kind of surprising that they didn't do that.
And those are really towns that we'll say end of November through February, you're not trying to go to Eastern Oregon very often with the gorge and the times that it's closed and the amount of snow that they get over there. So really, March is really the first time of the year that you could really think about going over there and not advertise and have it canceled. And then I don't have any results after the 16th until they're back in Portland. And it's a Wednesday night. We always talk about it, that people think it's a Tuesday night special. Portland ran Wednesday night specials for a long time. And this is a very special night because Billy White Wolf, he's finally had enough. And he wants the Von Steigers. And Kurt's, he's no longer suspended. So Billy White Wolf wants Kurt Von Steiger and he wants Karl Von Steiger, but he wants them on the same night, Mike. That is a true fighting wrestler, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really unique. He's going to take both of them on in singles matches, both in chain matches, which is his specialty. And he comes through and gets the win over both of them.
Yeah. So it's not just chain matches, they're Indian death chain matches.
Yes.
Now, most Indian death matches, as we know later on with Bull Ramos and a number of other wrestlers, were always strap matches. But Billy White Wolf, he liked to use the chain. We'll talk about that match, but Lonnie Maine and Tony Bourne beat Stan Stasiak and Buddy Marino in one fall. Haru Sasaki beat Sandy Barr and Steve Bolus. We'll talk about him in a second. Drew Luigi Massera and Luther Lindsay beat Bulldog Brown by DQ. Now, Mike, let's take a look at the main event. White Wolf would wrestle one of the Von Steigers in an Indian death match, not knowing which one was first, and if he won, he would get the second Von Steiger the same night. The Von Steigers refused to tell White Wolf in advance which of the brothers he would face first, not allowing White Wolf to plan his attack. I guess the plan would be different depending on which Von Steiger he faced first. No idea why, but I'm not Billy White Wolf, so what do I know? Anyway, White Wolf would battle Karl Von Steiger first, and he would beat Karl severely. And when Karl could not continue, the match was declared over, and White Wolf was the winner. Now, how badly did he bloody up Karl? Well, the paper states that he, quote-unquote, almost scalped Karl. Now, again, for our new listeners, we've chosen to keep the history of language intact, but do know that some of the language used in 68 and 69, even 1970, reflects a time when things were said that were very different. Words and phrases that today are understood to be insensitive and offensive were regularly used in the newspaper. It truly was a different era. Now, that said, it was time for White Wolf to battle Kurt in a second Indian death match. This happened right after the first match. But it wasn't going to be easy because Kurt, seeing what White Wolf had done to Karl, he refused to get in the ring. He wanted no part of White Wolf in the chain, and he tried to walk away from the ring. But it wasn't that easy, as 6 wrestlers ran from the dressing room, grabbed Kurt, and threw him in the ring against his will, and the chain was applied to his wrist. And Mike, you just know the fans were going absolutely crazy at this point. So White Wolf and Kurt are chained, and White Wolf proceeded to pound away at Kurt. This was a very, very one-sided affair, and Kurt was on the losing side of the beating. When White Wolf was about to defeat Kurt, Karl couldn't bear to watch his brother whipped anymore, and he entered the ring and took the chain off of Kurt, and the match was over. And then the Von Steigers left the ring, and White Wolf was declared the winner. And the Von Steigers, well, they simply ran away. They ran away.
The ultimate loss, just running away.
And again, that's probably going to tell you where the Von Steigers are headed down the road. Running away. Oh, my gosh. So the paper ads were for George Bolus from North Carolina. He was, quote unquote, flying in. But Mike, we know him as Steve Bolus, and he's covered in the Encyclopedia of Portland Wrestlers, available on Amazon, because we cover all the wrestlers except 2 that wrestled in the Portland sports arena. So we talked about Steve Bolus.
Steve Bolus is from up in Canada, and he was a journeyman babyface. He had come to Vancouver and teamed up with John Tolos, and they made an interesting sounding tag team of Bolos and Tolos, which is a natural, and they won the tag titles up there. Bolos was from Ontario, as was Tolos. They grew up in the same area, probably not the same time period, but the same area. And Steve Bolos was a good journeyman babyface.
One of those guys that You talk about being brought in just to fill out the card, to be a little bit different for the fans to see a fresh face. So Steve Bolus, he makes a few matches here in the Northwest at that time. So then we're going to go to the 20th in Salem. And I'm telling you, there's some talent on this card because the Tribesmen, Billy White Wolf, beat Lonnie Maine in the Indian Death Chain match. Because we know Billy White Wolf has had his head run in, and so he wanted a piece of Lonnie Maine. He's just beat the Von Steigers. He's going to do a series of Indian Death Chain matches. Kurt and Karl Von Steiger, even though they lost, were here, and they beat Stan Stasiak and Buddy Marino in 2 out of 3 falls. Kind of gets some heat back on the Von Steigers, but interesting to me because Stasiak and Buddy Marino are being pushed as a team a little bit, an underneath team, but they lose here. And Eric Froelich beat Haru Sasaki in the opener. Now, let me tell you about that match, Mike, because I know it's one of your dream matches. Eric Froelich used a back handspring and flying drop kick to beat Sasaki. Eric Froelich, flippity flip. He's advertised as flashy Eric Froelich.
Of course he is. I wish I could see that maneuver for the win. It had to be incredible.
And the thing I will say, when I read that he used the back handspring and the flying dropkick, Eric Froelich would be one of the very few that would be doing something like a back handspring, wouldn't he?
I could see him doing the back handspring and the flippity. He was one of the best flippity wrestlers of 1969 for sure. He was the Will Ospreay of 1969.
Oh, we might have to, Lisa, make a mark to edit this. But if we look at the people that are in the territory, I will give you all seriousness. Eric Froelich was able to move really well. But you're not going to see Billy White Wolf or Lonnie Maine or the Von Steigers or Stan Stasiak or Haru Sasaki doing a back handspring. So if you're going to have one wrestler do it, that really made it stand out. And Eric Froelich's going to be the guy that would do it in this time period.
Exactly. Yeah. We laugh and we tease about Eric Froelich, but I think he was solid. And he really got pushed in different territories. In Toronto and Los Angeles, he would get pushed quite heavily. In Toronto, he got a main event with the Sheik, just one occasion. It wasn't sustainable, but he had his moments.
And he was tall, fairly thin, but he had a very solid body. He was in very good shape. Now, in the Kurt and Karl match, they double-teamed Stasiak for the pin because Marino was out of the fight. He had been beaten to the floor in Salem, as we know, just outside the ring. Now, the paper described the main event as, quote-unquote, blood-splattered. That's a great description. White Wolf used a chain, quote, as a weapon, beating Maine in the head with it and opening up a bloody gash, and Maine was bleeding profusely. Referee Shag Thomas stopped the match and gave the win to White Wolf on a blood stoppage. And the paper says that was okay with the jam-packed crowd. White Wolf has never lost a chain match. Now, Mike, talk about that finish and stopping the match on blood, and what does that do for the fans, and how often did Portland use something like that? Because that's not ever used in nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the ultimate ways of one wrestler to exert his dominance over the other one, beating him to literally a bloody pulp where the referee figures he can't continue. So that's a very, very solid victory for White Wolf.
And he got over the chain match, the India Death match, and it will set up Lonnie Maine for a future revenge match coming up very soon. But blood splattered, that's a term we need to put in the ringside vocabulary more often. Blood splattered. So they go down to Eugene on the 21st. And I mentioned that Tony Bourne had been banned from the building in Salem. He is banned again in Eugene. And Billy White Wolf beat Lonnie Maine 2 out of 3 falls. 4 police officers were placed around the ring, and if Tony Bourne showed up, they were to arrest him, put him in handcuffs. Not just loggers around the ring, but police officers.
Police officers, I like it.
The Von Steigers drew the team of Buddy Marino and Eric Froelich. Luther Lindsay beat Haru Sasaki, and Luigi Massera beat Tony Bourne on DQ. Police officers doing their best to keep things in control in Eugene. Just so you know, Tony Bourne did not show up, and Tony Bourne was not arrested. Whew. So the next night, he's able to go to Portland because he's not in the pokey. And on the 22nd, Luther Lindsay beat Lonnie Maine by DQ in the Northwest title match because Lonnie had beat Luther the week before, and so he had to get the title match. Haru Sasaki drew Eric Froelich. Von Steigers beat Buddy Marino and Luigi Massera. Tony Bourne drew Dean Ho, Dean Higuchi, Dean Kalani, and Billy White Wolf beat Dutch Savage by DQ in a really interesting match. Dutch Savage was advertised as the quarrelsome Dutch Savage.
Oh, that's accurate. That's very accurate.
Already the paper knows he's salty. Lonnie Maine was DQ'd, which is interesting because he's wanted to get his hands on Luther Lindsay and get that title back because, as he knows, he never really lost the title. Beauregard did. So he's DQ'd heading into the third fall. It's one fall apiece, with Lindsay winning the first fall and Maine the second, leaving Lindsay unconscious in the ring. Now, Mike, you've been a referee, and I can see you doing this because I think it's malfeasance on the referee right here. Because after the ref left the ring to go back to the dressing room after the second fall, leaving Lindsay unconscious in the ring, Maine runs back into the ring, goes to the top rope, leaps on the unconscious Lindsay. The referee saw it from the dressing room door and DQ'd Lonnie Maine. What was the referee doing?
What was Lonnie supposed to do? That's what Lonnie should have done. I don't know about this for the referee. I think he was way out of line. I think he just should have turned the other way. That's what I would have done.
He's unconscious, and the referee just leaves him. I just don't understand it. But the fans clearly, can you imagine the heat from the fans when Luther is laying there and Maine goes up to the top rope to dive and nobody is there to stop him?
Surely the referee was going to place him in concussion protocol. He was just going to get his concussion protocol handbook. That's what was happening.
That is absolutely what was happening. Oh, Mike, there it is. There's that island music once again. So it's time to head off to Hawaii and look at Hawaii wrestling in March of 1969. Now, Mike, before we get started on the island interlude tonight, Lisa and I need to clear something up. We've been thinking about it, and we feel really, really bad about you missing Lisa's luau the other night. The amazing food, the drinks flowing nonstop, the music, the dancing late into the morning hours, the whole thing. It was absolutely one of the best times of my life, but you got left out, and that's on us. So we wanted to make it right. So to make it up to you, we'd like to hand you something valuable. So Lisa, if you would, go ahead and give Mike that little gift. And I can see your eyes lighting up. It's one of those Tex McKenzie $100 bills. No, it's not. You were looking for a Tex McKenzie $100 bill. I know you had been wanting that. You've been searching for one. Lisa and I had searched for it, and we couldn't find one either. And we looked at least for 14 or 15 minutes on eBay. So instead, Mike, we got you something even better. Yes, that is a $1 million bill. A $1 million bill. And look closely. That's Lisa on the front, grass skirt, coconut bra, drink in hand. And if you flip it over, that's me on the back, grass skirt, coconut bra, drink in hand. Yeah, it's a little faded because we ran out of printer ink about halfway through. But hey, it's rare. It's limited edition. Probably the only one in circulation. So, Mike, don't say we never did anything for you.
I will cherish this till the end of time.
There you go. So let's get to the show. Mike, let's go to Hawaii, March of 1969, and see what happened.
Well, we know these cards, all these Hawaii cards on this time period are just completely, from the main event to the opening match, filled with talented wrestlers. A lot of times you get the wrestlers coming and going from Japan, but they're mainstays wrestlers. As Lord Blair's told me, it's those guys that are in the territory for the long haul. Those are the ones that are drawing the money. So at this time, the main event on this card of March 5th is Nick Bockwinkel beating King Curtis on disqualification, and a little mix of styles in that, but still, I bet it was a great match. Ed Francis beats Friday in a boxing match. Ripper Collins and Luke Graham, who are a solid tag team, beat Wahoo McDaniel and Tex McKenzie. Professor Toru Tanaka beats Bobby Shane in another match that I bet was really, really good. And then Rocky Montero, who has been protected in this territory throughout the month of February, goes to a draw with Lord Blair's.
Yeah, interesting. The Bockwinkel in the paper is called the Man of 1,000 Holds. Not the title that Nick Bockwinkel, very solid wrestler, could do all kinds of stuff. I don't think I really considered him the Man of 1,000 Holds. And McDaniel and Tex McKenzie doing a cowboy and Indian tag team gimmick. very appropriate for that time in history in wrestling, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Westerns were really, really popular during this time period. So to play on their backgrounds and to have them team up, it definitely seems appropriate.
And you mentioned the boxing match. It was Ed Francis knocking out Friday in round 4. It was going to be 6 rounds, 2 minutes each, and it was called a Pier 9 brawl. Now, as a wrestling announcer, you always say it's a Pier 6. Now, Pier 9 is a key pier in Hawaii, historically important, which is why they called it a Pier 9 brawl and not a Pier 6 brawl. Very good for the Francis family to come up with that. But we move on. We're still in Hawaii, and we're there on the 12th. Mike, tell me about the 12th.
The 12th has Bobby Shane getting into the main event, teaming with Nick Bockwinkel, beating Ripper Collins and Luke Graham to win the tag titles. So a very nice team of Bobby Shane and Nick Bockwinkel. Tex McKenzie beats Toru Tanaka in a Texas death match. Kind of an interesting pairing there. Wahoo McDaniel beat King Curtis, and I bet that match stole the card, to tell you the truth. And then Rocky Montero and Mr. Fuji beats Tosh Togo and Lord Blears.
Yeah, so you have Rocky Montero getting a push because Fuji was over. And so teaming him with Fuji and Montero is an interesting team. Now, you mentioned Wahoo McDaniel beat King Curtis. Now, the paper wants you to know that it's King Slim Curtis getting back into that. He had lost 60 pounds on a world tour and was now down to a slim trim 300 pounds. But it's interesting to see Bobby Shane get the push in Hawaii, and that would be a really solid team, Shane and Bockwinkel. Those teams against Collins and Luke Graham, main event anywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That Bockwinkel at this time is still a baby face. Very shortly after this, he'd go to the AWA, team with Ray Stevens, and would probably remain heel the rest of his career. But right at this time, he's still young enough and definitely a scientific wrestler that he's going to be very, very popular.
Now we go to the 19th, and Mike, there are stipulation matches, and then there are stipulation matches. This is the only stipulation of this match I've ever seen. I think it will be the only stipulation match of this kind I will ever see. Tell me about Rocky Montero versus Nick Bockwinkel.
Montero's had a nice push, but now you're looking at what did Ed Francis do that Rocky Montero saw? Because it's hard to believe. Rocky Montero beats Nick Bockwinkel in an abdominal stretch match. So evidently, I'm speculating here, the only way for the match to end would be in an abdominal stretch. Montero has been, well, I guess he's been a heel. Definitely a heel now for sure. And yeah, sometimes we say this is a head scratcher. This is definitely a head scratcher.
So before you give me the rest of the card, yes, the paper advertised it, Montero versus Bockwinkel, in a match that had to be decided by using the abdominal stretch, as both were, quote unquote, masters of the stretch. I did not know that about Rocky Montero. And actually, Montero was awarded the match by the ref after Montero and Bockwinkel had each won one fall with the abdominal stretch and time expired.
So interesting. The referee is going to award the heel the match. Let's put all the heat on the referee.
Oh, but the rest of the card was solid. Give me the rest of the card.
Ripper Collins beats Bobby Shane. Again, two of my all-time favorites. Tex McKenzie beats Mr. Fuji. Wahoo McDaniel beats Luke Graham. And King Curtis beats Steve Kovacs.
Yeah, now King Curtis beat clever Steve Kovacs. You talk about names that wrestlers get. Clever Steve Kovacs, and he beat him in 2 straight falls. Do you know anything about Steve Kovacs for us?
Steve Kovacs is the name of Stephen Little Bear. He also wrestled under that name. There's always a little confusion if this was Steve Kovacs or if this was Sander Kovacs. 69, Stephen Little Bear would have been very close to coming into Vancouver. So this probably was Stephen Little Bear, Steve Kovacs.
Yeah, very interesting to hear that. But he was clever no matter what. But an abdominal stretch match, I don't know. But we got a couple more matches to talk about. Let's talk about the 26th in Honolulu, Hawaii, because this is a great match and someone's debut in Hawaii.
Tex McKenzie goes to a draw with Gene Kiniski. And I think we had mentioned that Kiniski had just recently lost the NWA title. He has won the North American title in February. This is interesting because I have seen a Tex McKenzie Gene Kiniski match live before in probably right about this same time period in Port Angeles, Washington, probably the summer of '69. So for Tex to get the draw is interesting. He's getting his push here as well. King Curtis beats Wahoo McDaniel, a rematch from earlier in the month. Again, that match would have been wonderful to see. Nick Bockwinkel and Paul Jones beats Ripper Collins and Luke Graham. Rocky Montero beats Sander Kovacs. At least that's what I have listed here. And Bobby Shane goes to a draw with Dave Rule. And Dave Rule wrestled literally his entire career in Calgary.
Mike, I know that's one of the results that you have, but I found a interesting note in the newspaper that actually changed that results for that match. And it was Nick Bockwinkel, Paul Jones, and Jim Osborne beating Ripper Collins, Luke Graham, and a man we know who would come into Portland and run Lonnie Maine out, and that's Bull Ramos making his Hawaii debut. That would be an incredible six-man tag team, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Having interesting Ripper Collins and Bull Ramos, who would end up feuding in Portland here in Honolulu in 1969. And at this time, Bull Ramos would have been in Los Angeles. So that's definitely feasible.
So one more match that we want to talk about, that's on the 31st in Hilo, Hawaii, small island, but they drew 1,500 people, a very good crowd.
In this card, we have Pedro Morales winning a battle royal. Ripper Collins and Buddy Austin, he's replacing his tag partner with Buddy Austin, beats Bobby Shane and Pedro Morales. King Curtis goes to a double disqualification with Tex McKenzie, and Lord Blears beats Rocky Montero on disqualification. Again, a very interesting crew and lineup and matches for a spot show, essentially.
Yeah, and Pedro Morales coming in and doing what new wrestlers often do if they're going to get a push. He wins the battle royal. And so that Pedro Morales is being advertised as, quote unquote, the Mexican champion. And he's teaming with, quote unquote, the Bobby Sox idol, Bobby Shane. Just so you know, Tex McKenzie will be passing out $100 bills again. And in some new information, the bills are engraved, quote unquote, engraved with images of Tex McKenzie and Nick Bockwinkel. Now, that would be really interesting to see. First being engraved and not just printed. Clearly not as good as the Lisa and Frank bill, but Tex McKenzie and Nick Bockwinkel. Mike, we'll keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, I definitely want to add those to my collection.
Well, I'm sure our little gift to you will be on the living room wall.
Absolutely.
Right above the couch, prominently displayed.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see when I come visit. All right, Mike, that was a pretty good trip to the islands. Great matches, great atmosphere, and I think we all learned one important thing tonight. That $1 million bill we gave you, it might not spend very well in Hawaii, but go ahead, keep it safe. I'm sure it's worth something. Right after my side of the bill fades completely away. But now it's time to leave the islands behind. The music's fading, the laser coming off, and Lisa reluctantly is putting the coconut bra back in storage, which means we're headed back to reality, because back in the Pacific Northwest, back to the Portland Sports Arena, the weather might be unpredictable, but the action in the ring is only going to get hotter. So let's head back to the Northwest and get back to Portland wrestling. Let's go to the 24th, and we're at the Cowlitz County Fairgrounds. And Lonnie Maine and Tony Bourne beat Kurt and Karl Von Steiger in a Falls Don't Count fight to the finish. Two, again, heel teams going back at it once again. This is where they had talked about earlier, where Maine and Bourne had lost two falls very quickly. And so Don Owen has booked this rematch with Falls Count. It's a fight to the finish. Luther Lindsay was stationed outside the ring in the Von Steiger's corner to prevent illegal switching, which was the tactic they used to a devastating effect the last time in Cowlitz. Billy White Wolf beat Haru Sasaki 2 out of 3 falls by DQ. When Haru was disqualified, and what did he do to be disqualified, do you think, Mike?
Let's see, either salt or karate.
Yes, he karate chopped the back of the ref's neck.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
The referee had to go in concussion protocol.
See? Yes. And Buddy Marino drew Sandy Bar. Luther Lindsay beat Karl Von Steiger in the opener. That's a really strong opener that would have been a main event just earlier in the month, Luther Lindsay versus Karl Von Steiger. Now, the main event ended when referee Denny Peck, who we've talked about not knowing a lot about, small, we've understood to be thin man, gave Karl Von Steiger a boxing 10 count, and Karl could not get up. Kurt violently protested the finish, and wrestlers filled the ring, and the paper says a battle royal broke out as Sandy Barr, Luther Lindsay, Lonnie Maine, and Tony Bourne all ganged up against Kurt Von Steiger 4-on-1. Mike, explain that to me.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what Luther Lindsay, and I can understand Luther Lindsay maybe, but Sandy Barr trying to steal the spotlight there and get the rub off everybody else. 4-on-1 against Kurt Von Steiger. Sometimes it's head scratching.
Yes. And Don Owen closed the night by announcing that women would be on the next card in Catalyst County Fairgrounds in April. So we mentioned Corvallis being a good draw, and Corvallis on the 25th drew a crowd of 500 fans, so that's a really good turnout.
That is a good turnout.
Now, they had a bunch of matches advertised, but surprise, surprise, we did unadvertised matches. The unadvertised first match was Shag Thomas as a surprise after being knocked unconscious by the Von Steigers, according to the paper. I don't know when that happened. He challenged Kurt Von Steiger and dealt severe punishment to Kurt. Shag went for the pin. 1, 2, and Mike, what do you think happened as the hand was coming down for a 3?
I would bet that time ran out in this match.
Absolutely. The bell rang, and it was a draw. Shag Thomas, although he dealt the severe punishment to Kurt, he could not get the win because it was a draw. But that wasn't the only surprise of the night, Mike. A second surprise match, Luther Lindsay versus Karl Von Steiger. Now, we've already had Shag versus Kurt, and here we've got Luther Lindsay versus Karl Von Steiger, so we're breaking up the tag team, but keeping that feud going. And quote-unquote, the mean German won the first fall, making Lindsay submit to a quote-unquote leg-breaking hold. Doesn't say what it is, but it's a leg-breaking hold. After Von Steiger was given the fall, he put the leg-breaking hold back on. Referee Luigi Massera reversed the decision and gave the first fall to Lindsay. In the second fall, Karl put the hold back on Lindsay and tried to break his leg and was disqualified. During the match, Karl kept talking to Luther Lindsay, and Lindsay would respond, "Stop, you're swearing." Obviously loud enough for the paper to notice and put it in the paper.
So much going on in this match. So much going on. Portland had that tried and true where one wrestler would win the first fall, then the other wrestler would win the second fall, and then the third fall was who knew what was going to happen. But in this match, Karl Von Steiger is disqualified in both falls, which is a different twist to the formula.
And so strange that he puts the leg breaking hold on and gets disqualified in the second fall because he's tried to break his leg. That's kind of the point of wrestling, isn't it? To make your opponent so he can't continue.
Yes, absolutely.
Should have put him in the full Nelson. So we want to go to another match, and that was Lonnie Maine against Billy White Wolf. And Lonnie Maine tried to choke Billy White Wolf to death by putting White Wolf's throat against the rope until White Wolf was unconscious. Now, Mike, again, calling upon your referee expertise. Referee Luigi Massera tried to pull Maine off, only to be knocked unconscious by Maine. Massera quickly recovered, as referees tend to do from being unconscious, tried to pull Maine off again, and you know what happened? He was again knocked unconscious. When Maine was finally done choking White Wolf, who was now on the ring apron, the ref recovered. Massera and Maine started arguing when White Wolf grabbed Maine's arms from behind, and Massera gave Maine a powerful punch to the nose, and the match was over.
We have Lonnie Maine being disqualified when the referee gets to punch Lonnie Maine.
Did you ever punch anybody in the nose, a powerful punch to the nose as a referee?
No, I did not. I did not.
Well, this was where White Wolf and Lonnie Maine were continuing their battle, and Maine was really trying to get at Billy White Wolf for taking the severe bleeding, the bloodletting that he had in Salem. White Wolf won the first fall with 3 tomahawk chops to the head and a pin. Just after moving from a top rope leap by Maine, where nobody was home, Then Maine evened it up after gouging Billy's eyes with a piece of paper cup, and White Wolf couldn't see.
Now, there's an interesting maneuver. Surely a fan threw a cup into the ring and they worked that at the finish of the match. I like it.
You just talked about fans, and you're like Nostradamus predicting about what's about to happen, because just before the third fall, Maine took a quote-unquote rough piece of tape, not just a piece of tape, a rough piece of tape, and hit it in the top turnbuckle. The fall started, but a quote-unquote good wrestling fan jumped up and took the tape unnoticed by Maine. When Maine took White Wolf into the corner, he reached for the tape, which wasn't there. He then searched the turnbuckle with both hands, while the fan stood up and held the tape for Maine to see, and the crowd roared. Maine left the ring, but knew he couldn't hit the fan, so he shook his fist at him as the crowd went crazy, as Maine was, quote-unquote, fit to be tied. The paper states this was one of the best matches of all time.
It sounds like it was incredibly out of control. Fans jumping up onto the turnbuckle. We needed a good referee there to keep things in order.
Fortunately, Corvallis had some good wrestling fans. And so we're on to almost the end of the month, and we're on the 27th. We're back in Salem. Lonnie Maine beat Billy White Wolf 2 out of 3 falls. Eric Froelich and Buddy Marino as a team drew the Von Steigers 1 fall apiece. But, Mike, they wanted 2 more minutes, not 5. They wanted 2 more minutes. And the Germans kept running around. So in one of those decisions that you love, referee Luigi Massera declared Froelich and Marino the winners by ref decision.
I don't know about that. I do not like the referee wielding that much power.
So my question to you, Mike, 2 minutes, not 5. Was that because Eric Froelich couldn't count to 5?
No, they figured they would end the match in under 2 minutes. 2 minutes was all they needed.
So think about it. In the past, you always hear the fans and you see them holding up their fingers, 5 more minutes. And so instead, they're holding up 2 fingers.
2 more minutes.
How did the fans know that 2 more minutes was going to be enough? But they didn't. Also, Luigi Massera beat Haru Sasaki by DQ. Luther Lindsay with a double count out versus Tony Bourne for fighting outside the ring. Now, in the main event, a no DQ match, Maine wins the first fall with a leap off the top rope. White Wolf evens it with chops and a pin, and in the third fall, the quote-unquote popular Redskin was lured into the corner by Tony Bourne, and Maine came from behind with a flying knee, followed by another leap off the top rope, and it was over. Maine and Bourne continued to beat up White Wolf when flashy Buddy Marino, there's that word again, flashy, Buddy Marino ran in to make the save. Lonnie Maine and Tony Bourne together as a team really were heat magnets at this time, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I imagine they're setting up a tag match with Billy White Wolf and Buddy Marino. You have to think Lonnie Maine was not in the best of shape. You know, he was that raw-boned, big body type of person. And he is jumping off the top rope every night. And now I know Lonnie didn't live to be into old age or anything, but you really, really would have had to imagine if he did, those leaps off the top rope every night would have taken its toll on him.
Absolutely. And, last night I was at the AEW show in Portland, had a great time. Thanks, Jim Valley, for the tickets. And in one of the matches, a wrestler, very smaller wrestler, did a top rope leg drop onto Roosh. And the first thing I thought of was, that's going to hurt you in a few more years. Don't do that move, young man. Top rope leg drop. Hulk Hogan, you know what happened to him just with regular leg drops. So we go back to Eugene, and to show you things were a little bit different, Eugene was having the home show at the arena, so there was no wrestling. Instead, they moved to Coos Bay, baby, and it is a double grudge match. Tickets were $2.50 for ringside. General admission, $2. Students, $1. Kids under 12, 75 cents. When you had to have 3 quarters to go to the wrestling, it was going to be good. Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas beat Kurt and Karl Von Steiger. So Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay back in the mix, because that's going to be very important coming April. Lonnie Maine beat Billy White Wolf 2 out of 3 falls. White Wolf won the first fall, but Maine won the next 2. And quote-unquote newcomer Eric Froelich, I think they just got confused, from Vancouver, BC, drew Buddy Marino in a very long 20 minutes.
Very fast-paced, action-packed 20 minutes, no doubt.
Yeah. And you would think that that would be one of your scientific matches that you really like. Eric Froelich and Buddy Marino, that would have been where they probably at some point started to throw a punch because they had a miscommunication. But that would have been a scientific match, and it would have gone 20 minutes. That's how openers often would go between scientific wrestlers. So it's really interesting to see that they weren't in Eugene, so they had a full amount of wrestlers for this card. Really good tag teams, 2 tag team matches there. And promoter Elton Alden called it the greatest card I've ever put together for Coos Bay. Elton said, if residents in nearby Telegraph Hill are jarred by earthquake-like tremors, just blame it on the action at the National Guard Armory. This match is a prelude to the tag match April 1st, and there's plenty of bad feelings between these two teams. They'll be out to soften each other up before battling for the championship, which is now in the hands of the Boxing and Wrestling Commission. It'll be all referee Luigi Massera can do to keep these guys in line during this grudge match. So the first thing I thought of was, what do you mean the titles were held up? And so I had to do a little more digging, Mike. And so here's what I found out. It's that darn Kurt Von Steiger's fault. Because back on February 22nd, when Kurt used the foreign object and was suspended, the actual match results were not Thomas and Lindsay, the winners by DQ. The match was terminated. And under the Boxing and Wrestling Commission rules, if a match was terminated and the Von Steiger was suspended, the titles were held up. So at this time, there was actually no tag team champions. Now, I have to say, looking back at all the results for the 22nd, reading the newspaper articles on the 23rd and after, there's no mention that the titles were held up. But storyline, because they're coming up to April 1st and a really big match that we'll be talking about, they needed the titles held up and this big match between Luther Lindsay, Shag Thomas, and the Von Steigers. So that was how they came back with that it was actually terminated.
Very interesting. We notice all through the month of March, we don't see any tag title matches, and now that makes a little more sense.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure what the foreign object was that Kurt Von Steiger used, but for some reason in my mind, I can remember Kurt Von Steiger using the blackjack or the slapjack, whatever you wanted to call it at the time, not brass knuckles. He would often have that device that he would hit the opponent in the head and knock him out. And we know that he said Shag Thomas was knocked out for over 3 full minutes. So I'm thinking that's probably what the foreign object was, because they weren't using chairs. As we mentioned before, Lonnie Maine brought a chair into the ring one time. So that wasn't used. So something like that. But they're setting up for a big, big match coming up. And on this date, Rocky Mountain Wrestling advertised TV wrestling featuring Luigi Massera and Buddy Marino versus the Von Steigers, Billy White Wolf versus Dutch Savage, and Lonnie Maine versus Luther Lindsay, 11:35 p.m. on a CBS affiliate. It's the only ad that ran for the whole month, and it's likely the taping from the 22nd in Portland, because those are the matches that took place. I'm not sure what Rocky Mountain Wrestling was, but it wasn't called Portland Wrestling at the time. What can you tell me about that?
That's really interesting. And though Salt Lake City and that area right in there has a lot of connection to Portland, because Kenny Maine, Lonnie Maine's dad, was a promoter in that area. Lonnie Maine came from the Salt Lake City area, which is often referred to as Rocky Mountain type name for the territory. One of your favorites, the Claw, Big Tom Andrews, is from Salt Lake City. So there, that very well may have been the connection to run tapes down into that area to see if they wanted to actually run shows there.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how they covered it being called Portland Wrestling or Big Time Wrestling, whatever they would call it on that. We're almost at the end of the month. We're on the 29th in Portland, and a new name shows up in this. But Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas won a battle royal. Kurt Von Steiger beat Luigi Massera. Edward Carpentier beat Ivan Kamaroff. Billy White Wolf beat Haru Sasaki, and John Tolos beat Eric Froelich. Luther Lindsay and Shag winning the battle royal, splitting it. Now, there was a $500 purse. Wrestlers in the battle royal were Lonnie Maine, Tony Bourne, Billy White Wolf, Eric Froelich, Edward Carpentier, the Flying Frenchman from Paris, Luther Lindsay, Shag Thomas, Haru Sasaki, Eric Froelich, John Tolos, Ivan Kamaroff. Now, Don Owen offered a spot to the Von Steigers, but they said no. They wanted to avoid being mauled before their championship match at April 1st at Memorial Coliseum because they feared bodily harm. That's a great way to get out of the battle royal and to draw heat. we're afraid they're going to beat us up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they're really pushing that. This is going to be probably the culmination of this feud coming on April 1st. And so, yeah, just a really easy way to get more heat on them.
Now, we want to talk about Edward Carpentier. The paper says he does his training on a trampoline and called him the Parisian Marvel. Mike, tell me about Edward Carpentier, because we talked to Rocky Del Serra about Carpentier was his hero growing up, and they had a match, and it didn't quite go as Rocky wanted it to, but Carpentier was a huge name in wrestling.
Right at this time period, I tried to figure out why was Carpentier here in Portland, and he had done a lot of extensive traveling in this month of March 1969. He had gone to Vancouver, Seattle, but he also wrestled in St. Louis. A lot of times when a wrestler is ready to win the NWA title, they go to different territories, so those fans are familiar with this wrestler. It almost looks like that's what Carpentier is doing right during this time. So I don't know if he was in the running, being considered for NWA champion, or if it was just a coincidence. But, really a nice chance to see one of the top rated wrestlers in the country at the time.
And they had started advertising for this April 1st show about a week in advance, that it was going to be such a big show that it wasn't going to be at the sports arena. They were moving it to Memorial Coliseum, where Don had run shows a number of times. I mentioned I was at Lonnie Maine, Tony Bourne feud, the first one. And before the sports arena opened, Don had run 5 or 6 shows and was drawing 5 and 6,000, 7,000 people. So it was a good place for Don to run. And this was going to be a big show. And he brought in Jersey Joe Walcott in town to ref that match that's going to be taking place, the Von Steigers versus Luther Lindsay and Shaq Thomas for the title. Tell me about Jersey Walcott. Give us a little preview of what that meant.
Jersey Joe Walcott had traveled around wrestling territories to be the special troubleshooting referee. Jersey Joe Walcott was a boxing champion. I don't know how old he was at this point, but past his prime, I think that's safe to say. And I think in April, he might actually get into the ring as well. So definitely a name to come in and spice up this card.
I can remember Jersey, some of his matches that you would talk about coming in April, and how the Von Steigers and all the other wrestlers were afraid because he would rear back like he was going to punch him. And being the boxing champion, you didn't want to get hit like that, like you didn't want to get hit by the Stan Stasiak killer hard punch. And so that's going to come into play in April. I'll just give a little preview. Because he's in, prices had to raise. And in Eugene, they raised the ticket prices, Mike. They raised enough to pay for him. They raised the tickets by 25 cents. That just blows my mind. They didn't raise it by $1, which makes sense to me. 25 cents.
Yeah, it was a different time for sure.
Well, we'll be talking about April 1st on the next time that the ringside wheel that Lisa spins comes up, puts us into April of 1969. But Mike, let's close it up. If February felt like everything was breaking loose, March of 69 felt more like controlled chaos. The momentum didn't slow down. It really built. You had Billy White Wolf on a tear, taking the fight directly to the Von Steigers and Lonnie Maine in those chain matches. You had Lonnie Maine and Tony Bourne continuing to push every boundary that they could find. Luther Lindsay is holding on to the title, but barely, with challengers coming from every direction. And everywhere you look, there was, as they said, violence, professional. There was controversy. There were matches ending in disqualification, count out, reverse decisions, stoppage for blood, just out and out mayhem. And that's what defined March the most for me. It's not just who won, but how. There were chains, there were chairs, there was interference, outside the ring fights, even fans getting involved. Good fans. This wasn't just wrestling anymore. It was a territory pushing the edge of what it could be. And then you start to see something else building. The attention to big matches, building towards a major event. The introduction of outside names and bringing in someone like Jersey Joe Walcott to referee. That tells you, Mike, that Don Owen wasn't just going to ride the momentum. He was planning something bigger. And he had to, Mike, because what do we know about the crowds as we head into April?
We look at this window of time very favorably because there's so many wrestlers that we have fond memories of. Lonnie Maine, the Von Steigers, those are legends. Billy White Wolf, Luther Lindsay. But one thing that we don't have a really clear view of these cards may not have been drawing what they had been in the past. We know that the Armory before the Portland Sports Arena was drawing really well. And there's one indication, and spoiler alert, we're kind of shooting ahead just a little bit, with an interview with Roger Rip Kirby in one of the Excitement in the Air books. And Kirby's going to come into the territory in May. And he comes in with Pat Patterson. They come in as a team. Patterson lasts about 2 weeks and then he leaves. And I quizzed Kirby about this. Why did Patterson leave? And Kirby was honest and he said the money just wasn't here at the time. So that tends for us to look back a little bit, look back at the territory, look back at this window of time. We look at it favorably for what we're seeing, but maybe it wasn't drawing what it could have.
Absolutely. And so we talk about the financial outlay that Don Owen had put to put Portland Wrestling and the Portland Sports Arena together. And so there was a real risk here. And so if we're not seeing the giant crowds, we had mentioned the Portland Sports Arena had, with Lou Thez versus Luther Lindsay, had drawn 2,200, the largest crowd at the sports arena. But if Don isn't drawing the big crowds, he's got a plan on doing something. And so we'll see as we continue on this series what he does. Mike, another great history tonight. Any final thoughts on Portland and Hawaii?
I look at the Portland of March of '69, and I would have liked to have seen some of these cards and some of these matches. I think they were action-packed, to be sure, and there was a lot of talent on these cards.
Absolutely. So Mike and I, to our listeners, we thank you for joining us. We continue to tell the stories of the wrestlers, the arenas, and the fans who made Portland wrestling what it was. Remember, new episodes of Ringside and Rose City drop every Thursday, so be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and of course on X at Excitement Air for even more great wrestling content. So until next time, I'm Frank Culbertson alongside
Mike Rogers.
And this has been Ringside in Rose City, wrestling the way it should be. Lisa, take us home.
And that's a wrap from Ringside in Rose City, where one ring, one city, and 1,000 stories never failed to deliver. I'm Lisa Hughes, and this has been a Yaski production. Catch every episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your wrestling fix. Until next time, keep your boots laced, your popcorn buttered, and your stories ready.